William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Okay, friends, we are going to start. Thank you all for coming today. I'm David Gruber with Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, and we are happily co-sponsoring this with City Square and with the Dallas Public Library. A friend of ours who actually did a hard conversation for us, Jeff Olivet from Center for Social Innovation, once said, "It's not that the system isn't working, it's that the system is working exactly as it was designed to work." That's the problem. Many times in the United States we think that the Horatio Alger myth is not a myth, and if you just work hard and play by the rules, everything will be fine. Unfortunately, we know that's, the systems are not set up that way. And so that's what was really important to me, to have Randy come back and do one of his book synopses on, just the name of the book is great, The American Way of Poverty. To delve very deeply into how these systems work and what we need to do to change these systems so they work for more of us. And so I'm going to have Randy do the book with you. Here's how it works if you've not been to one of these before. Randy's a very humble guy, but by the end of this, it'll be as if you read the book. So definitely buy it if you read it, but essentially it'll be as if you read the book. If a friend of yours wanted to come and couldn't make it, we're going to post it. Right, we've got our good friend Doc back there who is taping the whole thing for us. It's going to be up on YouTube, and we will add it along with the handout and Randy's PowerPoint to that page on our website, the Hard Conversations page, so you can go back to it, watch it, tell friends what they missed, and make them watch it. After Randy's finished, I'm going to invite up Bill Beeman from Unite, and he's going to tell you about how you can take this a little further. We're working on a little project with him. Listening to Randy is going to be great, and reading the book is great, but Unite actually has an experience that you can go through, a 3-hour experience, and when you come out of that, you not only have read, but you really understand what it's like to experience poverty. And then after Bill's done, we'll have 10-15 minutes of Q&A, and we will get you back on the road. Okay? So, Jordan, where's Jordan? Jordan's going to help us get the PowerPoint up. Friends, Randy Maya.
Well, good midday. It's great to see you all. Here's what we're going to do to start this time. I would like everybody to stand up, find somebody you don't know, and here is your assignment. Imagine that you have just had your car break down, and you have now been hit with a $1,000 repair bill. Your car has to be repaired for $1,000, and you need your car to go to work. My question is, how would you come up with the $1,000? Everybody stand up and talk about that. Ready, go. our seats. First of all, my observation is you like to talk, and that's really good. And number two, I hated to interrupt that, but I've got to get to my material. Okay. So, I've been doing what I'm about to do today for over 20 years. I do business books at an event called the First Friday Book Synopsis, and then I do social justice books every month at City Square. That's been over 12 years. The business books over 20 years. I'm going to do a PowerPoint introduction. We're going to look at a couple of things, and then after that PowerPoint, we're going to get to the handout that you have. It is my goal to tell you enough of the content of the book that you will understand some key themes. I am not kidding anybody. It is better if you read the book for yourself. But I know you'll never get around to it. And so that's why people bring me in to tell them what's in books. All right, so the book we're going to look at is The American Way of Poverty. We'll get that in a few minutes. And this is actually the cover that I see in my Kindle app. And so these are two different covers for the same book. Now, you can't read this. It's too small. It's developed by two people with doctorates in business, and it's called The Rule of 17. Communicating the change message requires 17 repetitions. When you say something that people don't yet know, the first 3 times you say it, they don't even hear you. They don't even hear you. And then as you keep adding to it, they realize you're saying something, they begin to listen, they realize that you're serious, they begin to question you on the message, they begin to act on it, and finally after 17 deliveries of the message, they finally get it. So my first comment is, this is an event here for MDHA about 3 to 5 times a year called Hard Conversations. We need 17 a year. We need more. Because you come and then you say, boy, that was really important, and then your mind drifts to other stuff very quickly, and by next Monday, if somebody says, did you go to that event, you're going to have a hard time remembering much of it. And that's the way we are. So this is a very important rule. You'll see me do something with this in a minute. All right, a lesson about what's news. This is a tweet, and it's a tweet from Chris Hayes, who is an MSNBC anchor, and he tweeted this, I think yesterday, almost without exception. Every single time we've covered climate change, it's been a palpable ratings killer. So the incentives are not great. Recently there was a survey on how big a problem do you consider climate change. It did not make the top 30. Now, there are some of you in here who believe that climate change is a hoax. There are others of you who believe that it's real. We are having a cold front in Dallas today. It's only going to be 99, but that's not relevant to the question of climate change. But this is a really important insight. You might want to word it this way. People don't want to hear bad news that they can't figure out what to do with, anything about it, and they just don't want to hear about it anymore. And so, I'm going to be blunt, poverty is a ratings killer. Let me say that again. Poverty is a ratings killer. People don't want to hear it. The incentives are not that great. And so this book, which is a marvelous book, has never made it anywhere near the #1 spot on the bestseller list. By the way, there was a book that did in the last 2 years. It was written by a man named Desmond, and it was called Evicted. And it was the city of Dallas reading for the year. And it was a Matthew Desmond. It was a great book, won the Pulitzer, and I did a synopsis of that book. All right, so with that rule of 17 and this little tidbit, let's stop and think. There are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas. There's actually, if you read the current descriptions of it, we're becoming a barbell city where there is really wealthy and really poor and a shrinking middle class. And that's really an important insight, is that the middle class is shrinking. we'll talk about that some. So there are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas, and the number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. I tried to get the latest news on this. I think you know that we have right at 90%. That's 90 out of 100. We have right about 90% of the school children in DISD who qualify for free meals, which means that DISD just gives them all free meals because it's cheaper that way. So there's a lot of poverty in Dallas, and even though the numbers go up and down a little, we are among the poorest of the poor. We'll see that in a minute. So remember the rule of 17. Let's repeat. There are poor people in Dallas. There's a great divide in Dallas. The number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. Remember the rule of 17. Spread the word. There are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas. The number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. Remember the rule of 17. Remember, there are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas. The number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. Let's remember the rule of 17. This will be the last one. Have you got it now? There are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas. The number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. This is a serious problem. And I am using Dallas somewhat specifically, but there is poverty beginning to spread out from Dallas. And that's happening across the country. So let's take another moment. This time I don't want you to stand up, but I want you to just turn to the person next to you and tell a story that you know of poverty in Dallas. Everybody knows one. Let's take a minute or two and tell each other a story. Ready, go. Do I want to tell a lot of stories, or do I want to get to some of the findings and some of the teachings in this book? And the book is both a book of stories and of findings and conclusions and teachings. So I wanted us all to hear a story, but I don't want to spend all of my time telling stories. But I'm going to tell a couple. Number one, one of my longest time friends in Dallas is Larry James. He's the CEO of City Square. I've known him since we were young, and we're no longer young. And Larry used to, over near the new Opportunity Center of City Square, no longer as new as it was, he used to go spend the afternoon across the street at an abandoned something, and he would carry an ice chest with bottles of water for homeless people who would sit there and they would just visit. Now, I'm going to give you a quote that I'd like you to remember. Women's rights are human rights. That's from Hillary Clinton, mid-90s in Beijing. Well, poor rights are human rights. We're talking about human beings. And whatever else you think, in a hot day, a poor person needs water like everybody else. And Larry can tell many more stories than I can. But the kinds of things that we take for granted, having a functioning bathroom in our house, having water to always access, having the ability to get a pizza, although I've abandoned that in my later years. Those are things we take for granted that people in poverty do not have access to. When you're homeless, it gets that much worse. Now, let me get to another end of the spectrum, and this is a growing and interesting problem. I got a phone call this morning from a man that I know with this problem. I work with business people, and a lot of them are people who work in companies and organizations, and others are what you call independent contractors, making it on their own, like I do. And a man who has had a job for decades has been let go. He is no longer young. He is old enough or within shouting distance of old enough for Medicare, but he can't yet retire. And how do you network to get a new job when you're that old? So that's a new kind of problem. So I guess what I'm really trying to say is that all around us there are people with different levels of poverty. Now I know you've all heard the news today. I know your heart is breaking. Mark Zuckerberg lost $15 billion of his personal wealth in the last 24 hours. But he's got a few billion left. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about everyday capability. And so, there are poor people in Dallas. There is a great divide in Dallas. And the number of poor people in Dallas is large and not appreciably shrinking. Now, in the famous speech, I Have a Dream, August 28, 1963, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, Martin Luther King said, 100 years later, the Negro, and that's the word he used in the speech, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. And so I'm going to give you a little field trip. Sometime I want you to go in your car to the corner of Preston and Forest. Now, if you've not been to Preston and Forest lately, let me tell you what's there. Everything. Nice stores, nice restaurants, nice shopping, great big supermarkets, everything. And I want you to just drive straight south. You get to Preston and Royal. And what's at Preston and Royal? Everything. And you just keep going south and you find a multitude, a plethora, an overabundance of everything anybody could ever want and places to spend money. It's amazing. If you had a good golf shot, you could almost tee off near the Preston and Royal intersection and it would land in George W. Bush's front yard. You keep going south, you see a lot more. But then you come to downtown, and now the name of the street changes, but this is your field trip. Just go straight south from downtown Dallas. And about the same distance, you're going to come to an intersection that would be about what it should be at Preston and Forest. And what do you find? Nothing. Liquor stores, payday lenders, food desert. If you don't know that term, it means there's no supermarket nearby. This is all within one city. This is exactly what Dr. King said, a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. And so here's a map of poverty in Dallas, and this is not, I don't have the up-to-date one, but this is 2000, this is 2013, and the brownish rust-colored are the severe poverty areas, and you'll notice they've grown, and you'll notice that there is a vast ocean of material prosperity and a lonely island of poverty. So, that's the city we live in. So Larry James, the CEO of City Square, says, it's not acceptable for a city as full of wealth and opportunity as Dallas to be ranked third or fourth poorest urban center in the United States, behind Detroit, Memphis, and Philadelphia. Poverty is all around us if we open our eyes, and it really should not be. So, what about this, inequality, where there is the very wealthy and the gap is dramatic? And you've all heard the phrase, the top 10%, the top 1%. Actually, it's the top 0.01% that has the massive amount of wealth. But there's zero doubt that the top 10% and the top 1% are really wealthy, while we have pretty major statistics. I'm going to read you statistics in the handout in a few minutes that are now a couple of years old, but they're not much better, if any better. So this is the inequality chart, and the U.S. has real gap between those that have and those that have not, and the gap is narrower in these countries here. Finland, Norway, Denmark. That's partly because of government services on health care and schooling, etc. So great inequality. All right, so today we're going to be looking at the American way of poverty. Just a tiny little commercial. It's a short one. At the next Urban Engagement Book Club, it's always the third Thursday of the month at City Square's Opportunity Center. I'm presenting I Can't Breathe, A Killing on Bay Street by Matt, I think he pronounces it Tybee, and this is about the story of the African-American man who was killed, and he said, I can't breathe. And it's quite a story, and it's quite a book. And we do that. My comment is that if you read one book, it's not enough. You need to read books, and you need to be exposed to more books. So come join us on the third Thursday of the month. Okay, I think that's everything on my slides. So get your pens out and get your handout ready, and we're going to go through the handout. This is a slightly shorter version of my handout than I usually use, but we only really have budget and capability of doing the shorter version here. So this is 4 pages. Typically I go 8 to 9 pages. So this is the American way of poverty, how the other half still lives. And I'll explain that in a moment. Why is this book worth our time? Well, number one, this book shows us something of a long look at poverty. Call it poverty then and now. And you'll learn about that in a moment. Number two, this book reminds us that fighting poverty is a matter of moral will and political will. Everybody take your pen and circle those phrases. Will, moral will, political will. We've got the money, but we don't see the poor, and we don't do what needs to be done for the poor. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to tell you this is a growing problem that's going to get worse, and I'll explain why at the end. Number three, this book reminds us that brief moments of attention will not suffice for a chronic problem. Underline that sentence. That's really important. Brief moments of attention will not suffice for a chronic problem. Take the simple story of Flint, Michigan. They have quit officially providing bottled water in Flint. I mean, this is breathtaking. We've done it long enough. They haven't used that wording, but they're saying, well, it's better and it's safer, but there are a whole lot of people who have not had their pipes replaced yet. When you've got a long-term problem, you need a long-term solution. And that's the important thing to understand. So poverty is not a short-term problem, and a short-term moment of compassion accomplishes really nothing. It's a Band-Aid on a serious illness. Anybody ever gone to the doctor and the doctor said, eat less and you lose weight? I got to tell you, taking better vitamins does not solve the problems that doctor is talking about. A serious problem requires a serious solution. And poverty is a serious problem. Okay, now you'll notice that the next section of my handout are quotes and excerpts from the book, the best of my highlighted passages. When you see one in bold, I put it in bold. I'm going to read a bunch of these. I know you can read it on your own, but not only will you not read the book, you won't even read the whole handout. So I'm going to read most of it. And by the way, I don't fault you for that. I'm given handouts and I don't read them. So these are literally my underlinings with my finger and my Kindle app version of The American Way of Poverty. And I'm going to read a bunch of these. So here we go. Keep your pen handy, circle the ones that grab you. In a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and say the one that grabbed me most was. So be ready for that. Number one, 50 years ago, 50 years after the social critic Michael Harrington published his groundbreaking book, The Other America. Now circle that because this is what this reference is about the long look. In the 60s, I think it was, Michael Harrington published The Other America, in which he chronicled the lives lived of those excluded from the age of affluence. Poverty in America is back with a vengeance. So 50 years after he wrote about it, and he said, boy, you know, this is the way it is, it's back. It is made up both of the long-term chronically poor and the newly impoverished, the victims of a broken economy and a collapsed housing market. And as I drove into the parking lot of the library, the story was that house sales are down in Southern California, and it's spreading across the country, and this is a potential real warning sign. Number two, the saga of the timeless poor, of individuals immersed in poverty for decades, of communities mired in poverty for generations, okay, all right, of communities mired in poverty for generations is something of a dog bites man story. It's sad, but it's not new. In reality, number three, the stories of the long-term poor and the newly destitute increasingly blend together, creating a common set of experiences that pummel the bodies and minds of those who live them, that corrode communities, and that all too often obliterate optimism. Now, everybody circle the phrase, obliterate optimism. If somebody wakes up in the morning and they are dismal about their prospects for that day and that week, and it spreads through the community, you've got a hopeless, not optimistic community. Number four, the other America, the American way of poverty, is hidden today in a way that it never was before. Its millions are socially invisible to the rest of us. There's another phrase to circle, socially invisible. The new poverty is constructed so as to destroy aspiration. It is a system designed to be impervious to hope. In fact, the book The Other America hit a raw nerve, at least in part, because so many Americans living comfortably in suburbias miles from the epicenters of hardship thought their country had already solved the poverty conundrum. That it could continue to exist alongside the affluent society was a source of tremendous national embarrassment for many. And so what happened was, FDR had his programs, and then LBJ came along with the Great Society, and we began to think, hey, we've made real progress. And then when you discover we haven't, that there is still abject poverty, and you begin to ask, how could this happen in America? In the United States of America. Are you aware that the mortality has gone down? And under the years that people live is now lower than it was for Americans. We're the only developed country where that's happening. And that's just breathtaking. Okay. Number six. After all, no society in human history has ever successfully banished poverty. And no polity with a modicum of respect for individual liberty has entirely negated the presence of inequality. This is a problem we have never solved. We've solved polio. Call me an optimist. I think we're going to solve Alzheimer's. I'm not sure we'll ever solve the problem of the Cowboys not winning another Super Bowl. But although I want them to. I want you to know that. So, anyway, all right. But we have not solved the problem of poverty and inequality. Ronald Reagan was elected president on a platform of rolling back much of the Great Society. And it's almost, and I'm not trying to get into a political fight here, but it's almost as though there is a program to help people, and then there's a group saying, let's lessen that program. And that seems to be a perpetual tug of war. So, number 8, too poor to participate in the consumption rituals that define most Americans' lives, too cash-strapped to go to the malls, to visit cafes or movie theaters, to buy food anywhere other than dollar stores. These men and women live on America's edge. All of these poorest people share an existential loneliness, a sense of being shut out of the most basic rituals of society. Let me give you a little example. When my sons went to Lake Highlands High School, we knew students who could not afford the fees to go to the activities in the high school. That's not a small deal. They couldn't afford it. And so, what do you do when you've got a group of students who can't afford it? They're left out. And they end up, pretending all sorts of things. And this is what happens. And that is happening in a multitude of ways in other ways. Number 10. First is the sheer loneliness of poverty. The fact that profound economic hardship pushes people to the psychological and physical margins of society, isolated from friends and relatives, shunted into dilapidated trailer parks, shanties, or ghettoized public housing, and removed from banks and stores. Everybody circle the phrase, removed from banks. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Transit systems and cultural institutions. The poor live on society's scraps. Reverend Gerald Britt of City Square wrote a few years ago, and this is beginning to pick up steam. I don't know who first said it, but I heard it first from him. And that is, we need to turn our post offices into, in essence, banking for the common person. And so, you see here in Dallas, there's not quite that problem. There's a bank approximately every 10 feet. But in parts of the country, there aren't many banks, and there are people who don't know how to use banks, don't trust banks, don't have enough money to really take advantage of banks. So separated from banking is a problem. Many people who have a $1,000 bill hit them on their car have to pay for it with a credit card. What do you do if you don't have a credit card with credit? Okay, turn to page 2. By the end of 2010, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, here are the statistics by the time of this book. So it's now a few years old. 15.1% of Americans were living below the federally defined poverty line, an increase of approximately 15 million people since the start of the century, 2000. Fully 34.2% of single mothers and their children were in poverty, up from 28.5% in 2000. Not surprisingly, in May 2012, UNICEF reported that the world's developed countries, underline this, the United States had the second highest rate of child poverty among the world's developed countries. With more than 23% of its kids officially poor, only Romania still struggling to shed itself of the awful legacy left by Nicolas Ceausescu's dictatorship had worse numbers. Number 12, the method is simple. This is kind of what's happening that adds to the poverty. You defund public services. You ensure that the government only delivers second-rate goods. You convince the electorate that long-term societal investments such as Social Security and Medicare are Ponzi schemes unlikely to survive down the generations. And it becomes ever easier to convince ordinary people that taxes are a mugging rather than an investment. Put a star beside that. You know, they're kind of two categories. Taxes are unfair. Taxes provide what we need. Whenever I get into a little discussion about regulations, I always ask this question. People who say, we need a lot fewer regulations. I'm going to give you a test. How many of you would like to eat for the next year at restaurants that never had to have their meat examined? That there was no organization making sure that meat was safe to eat. Do you trust every restaurant owner to buy good meat, or might somebody be slipping in bad meat? So, I'm sorry, I got off. Okay. All right, number 13. No one has an anti-poverty agenda. And one reason is they don't have that lobbying voice on the Hill. This is an important point to understand. There are people tying up the time of our elected officials every minute they can get to them, and there is nobody tying them up for the person who is homeless in South Dallas. Nobody. And so they don't hear that argument. All right, number 14, absolute equality is neither possible nor remotely desirable. It is, in fact, a straw man. So you can't have absolute equality. Number 15, I want to show how, and now the difficulty of reading these books. I want to show how in redistributing a few $100 billion per year of that $16 trillion economy. And regularly, when a program is proposed, the objection is, but how are we going to pay for it? Well, you have to shift stuff. Through changes to the tax structure and changes in how we prioritize federal and state spending, to put it another way, in reprioritizing who receives and who spends about 2 to 3% of the vast national pot of wealth that is America, while leaving undisturbed the remaining 97 to 98%, we can create a set of vital anti-poverty initiatives that have the potential to dramatically improve the lives of tens of millions of Americans. This book is arguing, as every good book that I read does argue, it's going to cost some money. Some real money. Number 16. Readers should come away from the American Way of Poverty with an understanding of the interconnectedness of these issues, of the complexity, both of the world of poverty and also of anti-poverty strategies, and with a sense of the changes, both in political attitude and practical administration, that need to be embarked upon in order to reverse the increasing economic polarization that more so by the day is coming to define 21st century America. Number 17, circle number 17, poverty is, after all, a web of problems, enormous in their complexity. All right, number 18. I wanted to make sure that my life attached itself to helping kids get a great education, or helping people living in poverty to get decent jobs and be able to work and have dignity, to make sure that people didn't have to go to the emergency room to get health care. I'm an adjunct teacher in speech at Eastfield College, one of the Dallas County community colleges. I lecture once a semester in the Cox School of Leadership, Cox Business School, the Leadership Center at SMU, to MBA students. I hope you'll understand this statement. That's two different groups of students. And I have a student right now, and I have one every semester, who simply does not have the capability or the the equipment to type and print out pieces of paper. Think about it. Okay. Number 20. As the recent collapse has shown, that's 2008, almost nobody's job security can be taken for granted when the financial system wobbles. We can start beside that. We are all vulnerable. And so number 24, this is what poverty is. This is the American way of poverty. I cannot afford to go to the hospital. I can't afford the ambulance ride. I can't afford to feed my family. Number 25. As I write the concluding chapter, we do not have the luxury of saying we didn't know, for the truth is that we did. Number 26. We know why so many people are born poor, why so many people become poor, and why so many people remain poor. We know how different problems affect people's economic well-being at different stages of their lives. And as I have detailed in these pages, we know, if not how to entirely eliminate these scourges, then certainly how to limit their scope and mitigate their damage. We know how, but it would cost money. Turn to page 3. Because we are blessed with natural and human resources in America, it's not unaffordable. The cost of inaction is far larger in terms of potential wasted, lives truncated, and communities corroded. For raging levels of poverty have once again become the spanner in the American works. Number 30. If in the year 2062 another journalist has to revisit this issue again to comment on poverty's stubborn presence on the American landscape a century after Harrington's work, it will be because of a failure of wills far more than a failure of intelligence or a lack of resources. Number 31, our task is to act. All right, those are excerpts from the book. Turn to the person next to you, pick out one of the excerpts and say, this one grabbed me. Everybody pick one. Ready? Go. You don't really have a place to do this, but maybe on the bottom of page 3 you've got some blank space. I want you to write down this phrase, 3.5 million. Just write down 3.5 million. All right. You see, we've got the problem of poverty now, and we've got the coming worsening of poverty. There are two kinds of people. Those with the training and education to survive the change that's coming, and those with the lesser education who fill the jobs that are filled by the lesser educated. The number one job in America is driver. Every kind of driver, bus driver, taxi driver, every kind of driver, number one job in America. But that 3.5 million figure is a new danger to lost jobs. That's how many people make their money checking people out of stores. That's the 3.5 million. Have you heard of Amazon Go? We are going to be able pretty soon to walk into a store and walk out, and this magic cloud digital weird stuff is going to know what we put in our bag, and it's going to charge it to our account. And there will be nobody paid any money to check people out, and those are the jobs of the people who are lesser educated. I did not know this, but let me give you a quick little piece. Viktor Frankl, in 1946, when he wrote the original German version of Man's Search for Meaning, the greatest book I've ever read. Viktor Frankl said in 1946, automation is coming and it will lead people to addiction and hopelessness. 1946. In the early 1960s, a lesser-known civil rights leader named Bayard Rustin said that the day is coming when the jobs for people in the inner city, in factories and manufacturing, are going to disappear. And the white people will have moved to the suburbs, and the inner city will be gutted. 1960s. And that's what's happened. 20-something years ago, the number of people in America working in some form of manufacturing or factory was 25 out of 100. Today it's 11 out of 100. And the problem is not China, it's automation. So those are some of the background pieces to this book. So I'm gonna skip the big paragraph. You can read that on your own. Drop down. A snapshot of the reality of poverty. This is a quote from the book again. There are people with no high school education who are poor, but there are also university graduates on food bank lines. There are people who are poor because they made bad choices, gotten addicted to drugs, burned bridges with friends and family, and then there are people who have never taken a drug in their lives, who have huge social networks, and who still can't make ends meet. Those who have never held down a job, and others who hold down multiple, but always low-paying jobs, frequently for some of the most powerful corporations on earth. And their children whose only hot meals are what they are given at school. So let's pay attention to those on each part of the spectrum. There are the chronically poor. They are poor, they're homeless or on the verge of homelessness, and they move from apartment to apartment because that's how long they can stay without getting kicked out. The chronically poor. And then there are the struggling multi-job poor. You can't imagine how many people are Uber drivers plus their regular job. And there are the vulnerable could become poor when the next round of layoffs hit. Turn to page 4. It's going to take money, serious money. And we can use 4 major revenue sources. This is not Randy Mayhew talking, this is from the book. A public works fund to protect against mass unemployment, a new educational opportunity fund to dramatically expand access to and affordability of higher education, a poverty mitigation fund built up from the introduction of a financial transaction tax and energy profit taxes. In other words, a reserve fund. And number 4, money to stabilize Social Security and start reducing the national deficit, made available from higher taxes on capital gains, high-end inheritances, and the income of the most affluent of wage earners. I'm not going to comment on how realistic that is right now. So let's think Maslow. Let me get my bearings. How many of you know Maslow's hierarchy of human needs? All right, enough. So here's, if you don't know it, Google it and look at it. Just look, know it. Maslow says the bottom rung is physiological needs. Start with food, shelter, health care. You got to make sure that people have something to eat, clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and a roof over their head. But then as they move up, you got to add the tools, beginning with education. And I want to share a thought about college and or trade school for all. This is really important to understand. For much of my life, a person with a high school diploma, and only a high school diploma, had a shot at a job, could buy a house, could buy a boat. But in today's world, the person with only a high school diploma has basically no shot. None. And that's why some people are beginning to argue in favor of government-provided college tuition or trade school. Not Harvard, but something that will give them the tools they need. And for people who say, how can we pay for it? We can. For people who say, why should we? Here's the interesting thing. Nothing in our founding says we should pay for high school education. We knew we needed to. And so we did. Here's a little research question for you. There are articles written, one of them by, I never remember if it's McNeil or Lear. I don't remember which one. But there was an essay written by one of those two who said the greatest government program in the history of the world was the GI Bill that paid for college and got people into houses. But if you don't know this, if you were a black veteran in the early years, you were not given the GI Bill. Okay, so drop down to the bottom, my 7 lessons and takeaways. Number 1, you accomplish what you pay attention to. If you don't pay attention, nothing is accomplished. So in other words, pay attention to poverty. Number 2, the crisis of the wealthy takes priority over the ongoing crisis for the poor in our society. Seemingly every time. Number 3, the growth of the wealth for the wealthy takes priority over the alleviation of the suffering of the poor in our society. Number 4, and so again and again and again, the poor are invisible because of the much, much greater visibility and influence of the wealthy, and because of the segmenting of the poor, get them out of sight from the rest of society. Pause. 2 weeks ago, I spoke in McAllen at a conference, and I went to Harlingen. I flew into Harlingen, rented a car, drove to Combs, Texas, a couple of miles outside of Harlingen. And there's a facility there, 2-story White House, outer building, where they're currently keeping, right now, it's a gated facility, I couldn't get in, the youngest children separated from their parents. The reason I went there is I sat there, I've got a picture if you want to see it. The 2-story White House on the left of the property, part of the facility. The back upstairs bedroom was my bedroom. That was my house growing up. And now it's a children's home, and it's part of the group that is taking care of those children And I want you to know that I drove to Harlingen and Combs and McAllen, where everything is on the news about it, and there's no evidence of these people in need. You didn't see it anywhere. I had to go look for it. Invisible. Invisible. Number 5, the solution will require real agenda changes, policy changes, tax changes, including much more robust estate taxes, a genuinely greater safety net, and for the future investments like education. It's gonna take money, big money. Number 6, and such policies changes are unlikely in the current political climate. And number 7, this is from reading 20 years of business books. This is a big deal. Put a star beside this. It's worth researching. A warning for the haves. What happens when nobody has any money to spend and demand shrinks? There's a very significant thinker about cities named Richard Florida who says that's the coming crisis. Well, that's it. The American Way of Poverty, How the Other Half Still Lives, by Sasha Abramsky. I hope you found it useful. I'm honored that David invited me back. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Okay, here we go. So Bill, if you could make your way up there. Bill is, we'll get you out of here by 1:30, I promise. Bill's going to tell you a little bit about a project we're doing with Unite. And one more thing, especially those leaving, check your phone. If you have a phone that doesn't belong to you, because one disappeared from the front desk over there, go very quietly, we don't want to embarrass you, but later, go to me or to James or one of the staff members and give them that phone that's not yours. Because there's somebody sitting here very, very sad right now because they don't have their phone. Okay.
All right.
Bill.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's give Randy a round of applause. I'm so excited that we get the opportunity to have discussions like this, and I just want to come up here today to get the opportunity to extend the chance for you to continue this conversation. I want you guys to get the opportunity to go a little further because, again, 17 times is what it takes to be able to get the idea of what's happening. And then after we get it, those 17 times, we need to go beyond that, be able to go to actually make action to take care of some of these things that we need to do in the society, not just talk about it, not just have a dialogue. But I'm coming up to you today. If you guys would do me a favor, I just like to exercise, I like to get people involved. Pull out your cell phones. I know everybody has a smartphone. Go to your calculator. Go to your calculator for me real quick. All right, we're going to do a quick math assignment. All right, we're going to roll through some numbers, and it's real brief, and I'll keep it brief to get everybody going, and then I'll tell you my purpose, all right? All right, if you have your calculators out, wave them at me. If you don't mind, I just want to see, I want to have everybody participate with me. Type into your calculator 21,000. 21,000, okay? All right. Now, 21,000 represents the amount a mom and her 2 children have on an annual basis of income. She's working, she's making $21,000 a week. All right, now, we're going to divide by 12. All right? When you divide it by 12, you're going to come up with a number. How many of you got $1,750 or 50? That is the amount represent how much this nice mom has on a monthly basis to pay for everything in that month. $1,750 in the annual income. Now let's go a step further. Let's divide it by, as you probably will guess ahead, 4. Let's divide it by 3, all right? Now, my math might be off, so don't yell at me, but what I recall is that should come to an amount of about 438, 437.5 or something like that, right? That, think about it, $437 on a weekly basis to take care of her needs and her children's needs. And if she drives a vehicle to pay for gas and fuel, heaven forbid the car breaks down. Heaven forbid a tire gets busted. And if she doesn't have a vehicle, now she has to worry about transportation and daycare for her children as well. Getting to her job. What about the kids' needs at school? Wait a minute, we forgot about a major need, food. You gotta have food, right? These are all consequential things that she has to do in making decisions to take care of her children on a weekly basis. And the reason why I know about this particular equation so well is because that was my family. That's what I had to, and I didn't know it. My mom was a magician, you know, somehow. See, she got put into a situation, not of her doing. She was married a young guy who came home from the military, started off working well, but because he was in the military, whatever he did caused him to have some mental issues and caused him to do something that was a crime where he got put in prison. And now the mother was in charge of 2 children in a situation where she wasn't intended to be the breadwinner, but now she has to step up and figure out a way to earn enough to survive on a weekly basis and take care of kids and all the needs that they have. So all the dreams that she had and all the aspirations she had for herself to do well are gone. Anything about education she wanted to do further, she cannot. Now she takes on jobs to figure out what role with her limited education and limited ability she can play to pay enough to take care of the bills. Any broken fences she broke by trying to get out on her own, she has to kind of lower her pride and mend those relationships because now she probably has to move back in with her mom or her family or something like that to survive. And so she ended up doing things like working in the convenience store until that job wasn't there, and then she delivered pizza until she had a car accident. And then finally she took on a role as a custodian where she was there for 30 years for the LA Unified School District. And I witnessed that. And I realized it as of recently doing this role of mine, working with United Greater Dallas, doing the cost of poverty experience, because when I learned about the families that are in this experience, I had to take a step back and go, oh my God, one of these families could be my family, you know? So let me explain. The way we can go beyond this event and all the great information we got about poverty, we're coming to you today from United Greater Dallas to extend the opportunity to you to participate in an event that we have, that I've been doing for the last 2 years, something called the Cost of Poverty Experience. Okay? The Cost of Poverty Experience is an awesome experience because it's a simulated month in the life of real families. It's not something that I created. I'm not the author of this particular event or the scripting that goes on. These are real families that gave us their information on decisions they have to make. And it's various size families, various racial backgrounds, and various amounts, because that's what's represented in the city of Dallas. Everybody's poverty is a little different. But when you participate in the cost of poverty experience, you get to take on the role of a real family member. And now you step out of your own reality. You step out of your own world and the ways you would take care of bills and problems yourself. And now you're in a situation where you have to take on, through their eyes, what they have to deal with and challenges on a daily basis in a month simulated. 4 15-minute weeks. And it's an awesome experience. I've done it so much these last couple of years, and every time I've done it, I've come away with great experiences for the people who participated. And not only that, they come away, these are people that work in the field. They actually are working in our community with the impoverished. And I'm always kind of skeptical myself when I go into it going, what are these nice people going to get? Because they're already in it. Some people are impoverished. What are they going to get from it? But I'm always amazed every single time we come out of that experience where people are coming out going, oh my God, I didn't know. I had the same experience when I learned about this and I trained on it. I went to a place to train for the cost of poverty experience, and I said to them and to the people that were sending me, I know everything I know about poverty. I don't need this course, but I'll take it because I have to. I'll go in there and teach them something. I'll show them what I know about poverty. And when I went through the cost of poverty experience for the first time, I was a father who was not able to read. He was illiterate. He couldn't provide for his family. He had a sick child that needed help, and she was very smart. The mom had to do everything. I was so frustrated. I had anger. At the end of this, my blood pressure went up. I couldn't believe I was going through all these emotions for an hour of an experience. But it's an opportunity for me to step back and just level set with myself. And also recollect with myself with experiences that I've been through. And also it gives me an opportunity to open my vision, because poverty is something we know about through our own experience. You know about poverty from what you've been told or what you saw on TV, or maybe even possibly what you experienced. And that's your particular view of poverty. But when you go through this cost of poverty experience, it allows you the opportunity to broaden your vision, to realize that there is so much more to this than you even realize. And that's something I really want the opportunity to share with you guys. And we are here today because during the North Texas Giving Day, starting September 10th, and we'll get some more information out to you today, we will have 10 days of cost of poverty experience. We're teaming up with the foundation, or the community foundation, to be able to present this to whoever wants to come. And in those 10 days, we'll fill them up as we go. But I think it's an awesome opportunity. And not just going through the experience to say that you had the chance to go through this experience. When we finish this experience, we'll get a chance to talk about what we just endured together. Talk about each family, because you don't know, every family is different in the room. So you get a chance to hear about each family in the room. And then after we're done explaining about each family or working on it, we'll talk about some very tangible next steps that we can take as either volunteers or opportunity to learn more about what's happening. But we want to make sure we put some action to what's happening in poverty now. We just don't want to talk about it. We want to do more. We want to go further. We want to continue the conversation. It takes 17 times, people. If you're already learned it, then you need to tell people 17 times what you know and what you learned today about poverty. But I really do give you the opportunity with the 10 days of COPE coming up with the North Texas Giving Day. And we'll have that information. If you guys can do me a favor right now, unitethechurch.org/NTGD. And that stands for North Texas Giving Day. unitethechurch.org/NGTD. And it will give you all the information on the 10 days of COPE that's coming up. I look forward to really working with you guys together to work through what these family scenarios are like. I can't wait for you guys to take part in the role. One of the instructions I give, and I want to give it to you guys right now, is when you come in, I ask that you come in a sense, not thinking about what are you going to get out of this, but what you're going to give to it, because that's how you get the most out of it. I want you to come in with the motivation of the Oscar winning performer that you can think about. Whatever Oscar winning performer you think of, I want you to come in with that. My particular character, Oscar winning performer, that I emulate all the time is Denzel Washington, because I know I'm handsome like Denzel, right? I know I'm handsome like Denzel. But also with Denzel Washington, and I just saw Equalizer 2, by the way, that was awesome. And not to do a plug, but that was good. But with Denzel Washington, he gets into his character to the point where you don't even recognize who he is. And I can't wait to see you guys get into your character where you don't recognize who you are anymore. You're that person that you're going through the COPE for. So you can see what it's like to be that person on a daily basis, even for a brief moment. It's just a glimpse. Because then after it's over, you get to go back home to where you live, your AC, your car, your home, your TV, and all the comforts that's there. But those people continue to live in that life for 365 days a year, all right? I thank you guys for the opportunity. I look forward to helping you. I have business cards to give you. I'm looking forward to having you guys take part in that. You guys have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? This on? Yeah. Jordan needs to help me out with this tag thing. Okay, yeah. Okay, basically, I think we're almost done, so we're going to let you go. One last thing. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Bill. I'll tell you how this kind of came about. Our involvement in it was because Rebecca, who is the executive director of Unite, said, you know what, we'd like to do this with different organizations, so each day of those 10 days where we go through the COPE, right, which stands for, again?
Cost of poverty.
Cost of poverty experience. We're going to do it with like a different sector, a different group every day. And so one of those days, if I'm not mistaken, it's the 13th, is going to be about homelessness. So I'll be there, and Larry James will be there, and Daniel Roby will be there. So and a few more people from City Square and from Austin Street. And we're gonna devote that day specifically to kind of debrief about homelessness also. And so Rebecca said to me, you know what? Would you mind having somebody come over and promote that day? And I said, that's not what I want to do. Because I think this is so obviously the best day of those 10 is going to be the 13th, obviously. But if you can't make it on the 13th, this is something that everybody needs to go through. Everybody needs to go through this. So if you can't make it on the 13th, there are 10 days there, and that's why I wanted Bill to talk about that. Yes? You don't have to raise your hand, Randy. You're the speaker.
Everybody take a picture of that and put it up on Snapchat and Twitter, and those of you who are still tolerating Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook, let's help people get this message that this is a serious long-term issue and challenge.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful day, guys.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.